Hey guys, welcome to the Editing Bar, the channel that brings you writing tips that make sense. I am so excited because today I am joined by three of my editing friends from the Developmental Editor group that I run on Facebook. And we are going to be answering commonly asked questions about editing. And then the chat is open. So if you have questions that you want answered by these experts, then please make sure to remember to actually post them. I even put a little scrolly banner down at the bottom to kindly remind you to ask questions. I've curated some in the event that you guys are camera shy or, you have, you're nervous and stuff like that. But super excited about this. I'm going to open it up to let them introduce themselves, and then we are going to dive right into the questions. So Kimberly, why don't you take it away?
All right. So let me know if I leave anything out, but I probably know more about myself than the rest of you. So hopefully I'll do a good job. I am a freelance editor. I work with both independent authors and some small publishers. Mostly with authors, I will do developmental editing, primarily fiction, and my favorite is romance, all the heat levels. And for the publishers, I typically do copy editing.
Nice. And Shelley, take it away.
Oh, first on meet.
Can you hear me, Shelley? Oh, I think she might have froze. We might have lost Shelley. Shannon, take it away.
All right. So I've got a couple of things to say. I sound almost word for word what Kimberly said, except I work primarily with science fiction and fantasy. So I'm a developmental editor. I work.
Uh-oh. We lost Shelley. Shannon.
Oh, no.
Uh-oh. Technical difficulties. The joys of streaming.
Maybe
Let's see. We'll wait for them to see if they get added back in here. Right? There we go. Shannon's back.
Oh, no, issues. So I'm not sure how much you guys heard. I'm going to start again. So Kimberly said I work with small presses and I work with independent authors, and I mostly do developmental editing with the smaller, with independent authors, and then copy editing and some other ancillary kind of things with the small presses. But instead of romance, I work with science fiction and fantasy. I also do some marketing activities, just depending on what you're looking for. So I do copywriting, and I will look at queries to try to make sure that you're not making any mistakes before using them to agents. A little bit more background, since we're waiting for Shelley. I am an Editorial Freelancers Association coordinator here in Houston. And I also founded a group, if you happen to be local, called Houston Independent Authors, where we do educational activities and online write-ins, and basically focus on the professional aspects of being a writer, and all of our activities are free.
Nice. And that's me. I like that. All right. Don't know if Shelley's going to be able to to get back in here. Hopefully she will. So I will take it away. Most of you guys on the stream know who I am, but I'm the editing bard, and I do developmental editing and story coaching. So whether it's you've finished the novel and you're like, hey, I need somebody to help me make sense of it, or you need strategic sessions of help someone to guide you step by step through the process of writing, world building, character arcs, development, all that kind of stuff. That is what I specialize in, specifically with fantasy and science fiction. Those are my two faves. I love those so much, but I pretty much do all of the genres except for horror and erotica. That's basically my jam. Hey, we got Shelley back. Yay. All right, Shelley, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. So we've all introduced ourselves. It is now your turn.
Thanks. I've been a freelance copy editor and freelance copywriter for 2 years now. I called my business the Ruthless Red Pen. I used to teach high school English and I was ruthless. And I know that people judge poor grammar, so I've enjoyed teaching my clients grammar rules while I edit, and they seem to appreciate that. Helps them write better. I'm an editor for a local ministry here in Dallas, and I'm an editor for a small independent publisher also located in Dallas. And my favorite thing is to help authors clarify their message, perfect it, so that they can get their message across. And then I help so many others vicariously then through them. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super glad to have all of you guys here, taking time out of your Saturday morning to talk editing. It's one of my favorite things to nerd out about now. Guys, just as a reminder, chat is open. Fire away for the questions. I have questions for us to go over in the meantime, in between, so that way we're not just staring at each other, because that'd be awkward. All right, so first question here is, I'm going to make this look a little bit prettier, maybe, hopefully. Just kidding. There it goes. All right, so guys, what is the importance of book editing? I'm super curious to hear what, let's just start off with the way that it goes down. Kimberly, let's start with you. What's
Sure.
the importance of book editing?
So I think my top two answers are, it's how you're getting your message out and the way you want to be perceived. So as a professional, it is important to make sure that you are delivering clean content. But then also, as a reader, I appreciate getting lost in the story. And every time I run into inconsistencies or just typos, it's jarring. It takes you out of the story and it ruins the reader engagement. So those are the two things that I think are top of mind for me.
Yeah, that's good. Shannon, how about you?
Well, Kimberly, she took the really good ones, but I'm going to go ahead and give you an anecdote about something I edited not too long ago. The line inside of the story, there was, a guy basically walking into a house and he finds a body on the floor, and he wrote, the body was laying prostrate on the floor. Well, excuse me, he wrote the line with the guy was laid prostate on the floor. So I had to go in and fix that, so nobody had this bizarre mental image of male genitalia just sort of laying across, an entryway. So to answer your question, what is editing worth? Well, it's worth not getting that mental image to your readers by accident. And that's one of those things where if they're both real words, then it's very easy to miss those, especially Grammarly is fantastic at missing really important mistakes. And a human eye may catch them even if you've shown it to 3 or 4 other people who didn't. And so an editor, someone who's professional, is going to find those errors. And they're also going to help you, as you said, elevate your work. If you look back at whatever it was that she wrote in high school or 5 years ago, and you see all these things that you're like, oh man, I can't believe I wrote that, or oh wow, this section of exposition is just so dense. That's basically where we are. We're able to look at your work and say, these are the things that are going to sort of distance you from your reader. And if you leave them in there, that might be the difference between them putting the book down and not coming back, and them actually loving that novel and it's staying with them forever. So you want somebody who has that professional eye to go through and say, okay, we're going to keep these things, we're going to move these things around, or maybe you should develop this a little bit more to help you provide your reader with a better finished product and a more enjoyable journey.
Yeah, I love that. Shelley, how about for you? What's the importance of book editing?
Well, in addition to everything they've said, I believe one of the benefits to book editing is any of your readers become aware that you are careful about what product you put out or what resource you're producing. And if you do not have book editing, it indicates to the reader that either you don't care enough about your service or your product or your message, or you were not aware that your message had errors or needed work or was weak or had holes in it or something like that. So you may have gotten that reader to read your first book, but they may not come back and read your next book. They will be negatively influenced by your lack of editing. So if you want to keep your readers and bring them back for your next product or next article or next blog post or next book, which I guess that's what we're focusing on right this second, then you would want to present to them the best product or service or book that you can.
Yeah, I agree. I love that. And so for me, the importance of book editing is, when I look at places like Wattpad or, fanfiction.net, because I love fan fiction. The thing that I've run into there is everybody believes that their words are sacred. And it's like, yes, the first draft of a book usually is going to be the best work that you had done up until that point. But that does not mean that it is going to be your best work. And editing is so important because, especially when you have somebody to give you the insights versus trying to discover them and kind of fumble your way through yourself, having somebody look at it and go, is this what you're trying to say? I had that with a client of mine. I was like, I read through her introduction she's writing a nonfiction. And I was like, you're like, here's the point. Here's what you're writing. It's everything around the point. I'm like, right to the point. And she was like, oh yeah. That's the importance of an editor, is that, and editing the book, especially from draft 1 to draft 2, is that draft 1 is just getting it out. Draft 2 is actually editing draft 2 is actually where you start to really refine the story and tell the story that you want to tell. Oh,
sorry to interrupt.
No, go for it.
Isn't it, from an author's perspective, I've got to believe that it would be so much more comfortable to have that one-on-one conversation with an editor than to get that feedback about going around the point in a public review. Like, it makes sense to me that it's worth the investment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And rather than getting like 2 or 3 stars because they're like, I feel like this was what they were talking about, but it was kind of vague. Yeah, you definitely don't want that.
I think especially when you're looking at public reviews, the goals that those public reviews have are often to convince somebody else to either buy your book or to not buy your book. And if for some reason they've taken the way you've written your book as personally egregious, and oftentimes they can be extremely mean, especially on Goodreads. And so the difference between having an editor or beta reader or showing your book to somebody who has a inclination to help you is you're going to see them say, okay, well, this was the problem, but this is how you fix it, or this is the problem and this is why I didn't like it, versus somebody saying, don't waste your $5 and maybe screaming at you a little bit. And that, seeing the review isn't necessarily going to make you a better writer, but getting feedback ahead of time by, again, people who are invested in you being successful and who care about your book is it's just such a difference. It's really not worth, even if you're not getting an editor, even if you're just getting friends to look at it, it's really much better to show your book to a lot of people and get that feedback from those who want you to succeed versus those who are actively engaging and maybe trying to get you to fail because they don't want other people to read your book.
Yeah, I actually ran into that. So right now I'm in the middle of a cohort with the publisher that I freelance with, New Degree, and one of the students that I was talking to yesterday, they were like, so I'm kind of terrified of publishing because they read about their their idolized author. Someone just ripped their book to shreds on Goodreads. And she's like, I don't want that. And I'm like, you know what? Here's the thing. There's always going to be one dingus out of the bunch that just wants to be a jerk. And I was like, something that I saw on Twitter, which I absolutely loved, was someone was like, I got my first negative 1-star review, and it means that I've reached a broader audience than the one that I was targeting. And I was like, I freaking love that. Like, that's such a great mentality. Like, here's what I was going for, and now I've reached the spectrum on either side, where there's going to be the people who are 3 and 4 stars that were like, it was good, not my cup of tea. And then there's going to be the 1 and 2 stars that are just like, yeah, I hate life. So, all right. So Independent Book Review has a question for Shannon. Would love to hear about any of Shannon's tips for effective queries, including potential formulas she likes to go with.
Okay. Well, this might take up the whole thing. So I'm trying to think, and I haven't had all my coffee, on how I can very quickly tell you. One of the things that I might suggest is actually go follow Houston Independent Authors, because you can find my hour-long talk on major mistakes people make in their queries. So that's first. So it's at Houston Authors on Facebook, or you can just search Houston Independent Authors. But your effective query essentially is teaching the agent where they're going to try to place your book and how to sell it, because their job then is to take this information and take your manuscript to a publisher and teach them how to sell it. And so the easier it looks to sell your book, the more likely they are to take you on. But a lot of mistakes people make is because they don't realize that agents are individualized. And so what they're looking for is different. And a lot of people don't truly go through their entire website or their entire listing and see what they want. So you may have one agent over here who only wants 500 words of a synopsis max, plus a one-page query letter, and they want you to submit it a certain way. But if you go to their website and see a contact form and put all your information there, they're never going to see it, because perhaps that contact form just goes to a webmaster. So make sure when you go through their listing to see what they actually want, and make sure that when you're writing your query, that you're focusing in on how it makes it so that you're clearly trying to define who your audience is, and you're clearly trying to define how they're going to market that book. So if it's asking you about yourself and your personal history, you don't want to maybe necessarily put in that you won an honor society medal back in high school if what you're writing is vampire erotica, because it's not super duper relevant. But if you spent 2 years doing like vampire makeup or horror monster makeup inside of B movies when you were younger, that's a selling point, because it's super relevant to your audience and it's interesting to them, whereas the honor society thing isn't. So just focus in on how you're showing that you are interesting to your audience and how your book is interesting to your audience. And so if you're not including those things, if you're just trying to give a full-on summary, then it's probably not going to grab their attention the same way. So that's long and short I can give you right here. But again, I've got an entire hour's worth of information, and you can just scroll through and find our video from the event a couple of weeks ago.
Nice. Love it. Dawn has a question. So speaking of investment on the business side of writing, thank you for acknowledging that writing is a business. What is the average cost for editing a novel? Is it per word or some other metric? Oh, I love these questions, because the answer is basically yes, but it's so individualized. Let's see if we haven't lost Shelley. Shelley, maybe.
Well, of course, it depends.
Okay, good.
It depends on what kind of editing you're paying for at the moment. And some editors charge by the hour, some charge by the word, some charge by the project. For copy editing, which is what I do most, I charge usually by the hour. And the number of words that I can edit in an hour depends upon the quality of the writing, to be honest.
Yeah.
I can copy edit a clean, clear text at a rate of about 4,000 words per hour. But if a text is not well written or has a whole lot of errors in it, then of course I can only copy edit about 1,500 to 2,000 words per hour. So that would then, of course, impact how much it's going to cost to edit the whole novel.
Yeah, that makes sense. Kimberly, how about for you?
Yeah, when I first started out, I did it based on just per word, and then realized that it's also the state of the manuscript. And so now I charge both for developmental editing and copy editing by the hour, but I do a quote. I take a look at, I'd love to see the full manuscript ahead of time, just so I know what I'm getting into, because a lot of times the first few chapters are the cleanest. And then you get into either a saggy middle or a abrupt, this is supposed to be a cliffhanger and is so unsatisfying. So I like to skim through the whole manuscript and give an accurate quote. And that quote is also based on my trends, my history of editing and how many hours I spent on that many words. So I do the same thing. I look at what I keep, in my records of projects that I've worked on, what was the state of the manuscript, how many words per hour was I able to edit, and then I use that information for future projects.
Nice. Really good. Shannon, how about for you?
So Kimberly and I, it sounds like, are very similar in our business approach, but again, she works with all the ranges of romance, and I usually work with science fiction, fantasy, and then mystery and that kind of thing. So with my independent author clients, I try to give them a per word cost, but same thing. I want to see the manuscript first. And I know some people are they have a hard time handing it over until we have some sort of, agreement. So at the very least, I'll ask for the first couple of chapters, and then I want the last couple of chapters because I can tell if the beginning matches the end. Which I know people are like, ooh, why would you do that? But generally speaking, I want to see the whole manuscript so I can get an idea of if it looks like it's got a good flow to begin with. And then when I work with small presses, one of the things I'll do is a project cost with a do not exceed cap, and then also cost benchmarks in the middle. And one of the reasons I do that is because occasionally I'm the person who's actually interfacing with the client, or excuse me, with the author. And not all of them will do it that way. A lot of times, if I'm doing just a copy edit, then I don't have any direct interaction with them. But if I do have direct interaction, I want to make sure they know, oh, hey, we've spent this much time. And if your budget is X, I don't want us to go over the budget because your author thinks that I'm now their personal consultant. And so it's a little bit different when you're working with somebody who's an individual, and you can go, okay, this is your total. That way you can budget for it. That way you know exactly what you're getting into. And then for what's almost like project management, where it's like, okay, things may crop up, things may come up that we haven't really thought about, but you've got this max out for these particular activities. And I'm going to let you know once you start getting close to that 25% mark or that 50% mark, or if we hit 75, or when we may have to readjust because your scope has crept up.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think I approach it in a very different way, in the sense that, looks like we lost Shelley permanently. Bye, Shelley. We miss you. All right. So it will be 3 editors answering questions. Shelley's hotspot has basically had a stroke and died. So we will get Shelley back on another one of these, because I plan on doing more of these. So the way that I look at it is, and I've approached it differently. So I essentially do it almost on a salary basis, because no matter what the word or what words, no matter what the state of the manuscript, it's a flat rate that I charge for everything. Now, I'm only doing developmental editing. I do include inline comments, like scene by scene kind of thing, because really, if I just go through and I'm like, hey, you have these issues, but I don't point out where they are, then it's like, great, I have no idea how to fix it, but that's awesome. So I'm doing a little bit of line editing in that, and I'm also willing to take first draft manuscripts. I've taken most of the ones that I have done edits for have actually been first draft. But yeah, I basically charge a flat rate, and then it's upon me based on what I know I can do within a certain time span. Like, okay, if I have this many hours that it takes me to edit this many pages, this is what I'm paying myself. And then if I go over that, I'm working for less and less. So it incentivizes me to keep going and to get it done in the manner that, or in the time frame that I've given to the client, while also keeping it affordable. So it doesn't matter what state of the manuscript it's in. It will hurt my soul a little bit. So I mean, if you guys at least can send me things that are legible, that helps. But yeah, that's typically how I charge. Is it's a certain percent. Gosh, I had coffee today, but apparently not enough. I do it based on a certain cent per word, and then also taking into account my time. And then I just charge that as my flat rate. And then I'm like, unless you're asking me to do additional work, then everything in that is going to be included. So
that really makes sense for your focus on like coaching also.
Yeah. Because my ultimate goal is to try and help build up the author no matter where they're at. And that's why I love first drafts and going through the first drafts, is because I can actually save them a extra drafting step by working with them on that initial first draft. Because then when we write the second draft, it is so much cleaner than it would have been if they had just tried to do it on their own. And a lot of those plot holes get fixed when they work with me. Like, yeah, you remember that part that you had there? Yeah, it doesn't work. Well, let's see. So Independent Book Review said, love this focus on reviews. Really, as this was going back to what we talked about a little bit earlier, really practical way to think about editing and refining. I agree. You got to make sure that you take into consideration that final product, because if you don't, and this is kind of one of my big things, is that you have to put your best book forward, especially if it's your first one, because no one's going to touch it with a 6-foot social distancing pole if you screw it up.
And can I add on to that from a spin the perspective a little on reviews?
Go for it.
For the authors that are listening and asking questions, I would turn it around and ask them to also provide reviews for their editors, because it's the same kind of word of mouth business. It matters. So when someone tells a friend, hey, this book was really good, you should read it, what that does for your readership, your business, is the same as for editors. We depend on that word of mouth. I want to hear, just so I can improve from project to project and year to year, what worked and what didn't. So everybody likes reviews.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I had a client I had rushed through and left my comments, and then typically I leave like the overall view that I had for the chapter and then some encouraging words at the end. And I didn't do that. And the client was like, I really missed that. She's like, I can totally take like pointing out the things that need to be fixed. She's like, but when you just ended it, she's like, it was actually, I got really disheartened because I thought that it was just really, really bad. And I was like, oh no. And I needed to know that.
Yeah.
And that's not something that I would have realized that she was looking forward to, is like, okay, like, yes, there are these issues, but clear picture on how to fix it. And all it took was that little bit of encouragement at the end. And I was like, and I thanked her. I was like, I appreciate that kind of feedback, because that helps me coach better.
And isn't it so important? Like, I'm sure you both already know this, but I have found for my clients, they appreciate so much the comments that are also not about something's wrong and how to fix it, but what's working well, because that's important also as a skill to take it to the next book they're writing, to continue to do that, to delve into that character and really, give us the good descriptions. And so it's important to also give praise when it's working.
Yeah, absolutely. So important. With the students that I'm working with now, I joke that I'm developmental editor, story coach, and writing therapist. I'm constantly walking the authors back from the emotional precipice from which they're about to fling themselves off of. And it does. It's that fine balance of like, here's what you did great. Here's what we need to work on. And you're doing good. Like, you're literally no different than like every other author that has ever walked before you. It's like we've all done the same things.
Yeah, the challenges feel so big, and the encouragement helps to keep going, that you're on the right path and it's worth your time and effort.
Yeah. All right. So we got a comment from Linda here. So I'm editing the first draft of my novel now. When the second draft is done, I plan to get feedback from a few friends who are willing to be my beta readers. Should I hire a professional editor after I edit my second draft with feedback from them? What is the recommended order for the of business? So Shannon, why don't you take it away first?
I wish you listed what kind of editing first and foremost. With developmental editing, I'm kind of the same, where I like to see the first draft, because I know once somebody has written 3 or 4 drafts, they're kind of frustrated and it feels like there's no solution. You're talking about second draft, but if you are getting feedback from your betas, your critique partners, that there's things that are still missing or wrong, or you feel incomplete, or you're not sure what's going on, but there's just this sort of vague thing that isn't working, you definitely should grab a developmental edit, or at least a manuscript evaluation or assessment or review. We have different names for that, which is like a abbreviated developmental edit, so it's not as costly, especially if you're looking at budgets. And that will help you figure out what the big picture things that aren't working, or if there's something stylistic that perhaps is actually working against the story. So it kind of comes down to this, especially if this is one of your first novels. I would suggest getting professional help if you're running into that circumstance where you're like, it's not working, I'm not sure why. I'm asking friends who don't have a professional background, so they're giving me advice that seems kind of bananas. One of the maxims, and I'm probably going to butcher it, is that readers are very good at pointing out what's wrong, but they're not good at all at telling you how to fix it.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's good to have a developmental editor, especially when you're in that circumstance. So I actually prefer to get a first draft. I think a lot of developmental editors feel the same way, just because it's still fresh in your mind. You're still excited about it. You haven't tried to fix things, and then it somehow either ends up just the same. The problem wasn't truly addressed, or perhaps worse, because now you're disheartened about it. And we're still working with like new content that you're excited and happy, and that we can mold together into a story that truly flourishes.
Yeah. Kimberly, how about for you?
Yeah, I would say if I could just do a little plug for how much time I've spent on this beta reader question, go to revisiondivision.com and check out the tips. When I first started writing the blog, it was like, oh, why do I have a blog? And I didn't want to call it that, so it's tips. But anyway, there's a really great lengthy blog post or article that talks about how to get better beta reader feedback. And so I think, yes, to answer the original question, definitely get feedback from those close friends that will be honest with you if just overall in general you're on the right track, if they enjoyed the story. But I would branch out from that and look for beta readers that enjoy your genre, and make sure that you have some from your target audience, whether it's the right age group or the right people with those interests, or have find it relatable. And then I would rely on those beta readers to provide the feedback of what worked and didn't work for them, to point out the obvious things, because it'll save you money, so that when you take it to a developmental editor, they don't need to spend as many hours on the simple things and be distracted, and we can focus on the really complex elements that you need the most help with.
Yeah, that's good.
I absolutely agree. Thank you, Kimberly, for pointing out the fact that what you're looking at with friends and family or review partners, and a beta reader is truly somebody who loves the genre that you're working in, or loves the type of story that you're writing. And so if you're trying to get fantastic feedback that you'll know, either this little thing that you did that you're worried about works for your audience, that's how you figure it out. Because sometimes with reviewers, especially if you're going into cold reviews where you don't see them all the time, or you have open review sessions, you might get somebody in there who hates whatever your genre is and will basically tell you to write a different book. And it's terrible. And I've been doing critique for about 10 years now, and I've seen some very terrible reviewers out there, people who just walk in and think that if you're writing comedy, it's not real literature, that if you're not writing esoteric poetry, that you're wasting your time. And then I've seen them sort of estimate the emotions of, a new writer that's coming in and showing them their stuff for the first time. So I'm not trying to scare people completely away, but just take all of your, feedback with a grain of salt, because every once in a while you'll have that. I can't remember what you called, like the weird reviewers. Was it wackadoo? You'll have these wackadoos out there. They're just super duper mean. But if you go to your actual, you're good to your audience, the people who love, like in Kimberly's, circumstance, your romance lovers. if you're showing it to romance lovers and they're saying, it's not quite working, you really need to pay attention, because that would be your audience. And if they're saying it's not working, then you definitely want to branch out and get help from a professional.
Yeah, don't give your grandma your steamy contemporary and expect her to be like, this is great, unless she's,
yeah, unless grandma loves that kind of thing. I mean, I first read, a bunch of Harlequins at my granny's house. So I don't know if that's where mine came from.
Yeah, for me, betas is one of those things that I'll be honest, irritates the living bejesus out of me, because more often than not, what I see, and this is particularly in Facebook groups, which I'll probably have a rant about one of these days. But what I see so often is people will go, well, I have beta reader, or just use beta readers and save yourself the money and not get an editor. I'm like, literally two completely different things. Like you said, the beta readers are your fan base. They are the ones that live in that genre and that can help you know whether you're on track for what's expected in that genre. Just simply going to them for editing, they're great at reading, not so great at fixing. And that's why most of the time I'll tell clients, I'm like, don't get beta feedback until you've had it edited. And specifically, I tell this to newer authors, because the newer authors are the ones that come in. They're like, I have a great idea. They blast it out on a Facebook group for people who love and hate the genre. And then they're like, just read a different book. This sucks. And then they get incredibly discouraged and they're disheartened. And then they end up just throwing it away. And that pisses me off to no end. And so I tend to steer people away from early beta feedback until they've at least gone through a developmental edit and taken care of the major plot holes. Because the beta readers, in large part, are not trained to find those. Whereas we've had the experience of searching them out, finding them, and helping authors correct them. And then after developmental feedback, if they are wanting to get beta feedback, that is when then I typically recommend, okay, go find a group of people who read this genre and ask them if it all fits and plays nice together. And then if it does, you're on the right track. But I've personally used early beta feedback when I was writing my fan fiction, because I wanted to test out different things and see what kind of reaction I got. But I used it for that. I used it for very specific feedback. I didn't ask them for plot holes. I didn't ask them for advice. I tested it. I basically used my readers as guinea pigs. They're all in therapy now, but they're making a good recovery. But that's what I used the betas for. And so that's what I try and recommend to people, is that if you're going to use an early beta, test out ideas on them and then implement them into the story, and then edit the book before you then give it back to them.
And I think you brought up a great point about providing your beta readers with pointed questions. Otherwise, you're just going to get back the, I liked it, or you don't get the specifics about what they didn't like. So it's really important to be specific about what you're looking for, whether, did the chapter endings make you turn the page? Did the opening make you want to keep reading? The specifics about how people felt about the characters, or was it okay that this happened in the plot? Like those are important.
So I have one of the things that I do occasionally, not very often, is professional beta reading. And this sounds weird, but I got the idea because my son is actually in a professional beta reading group for kids that Star Waddell set up, and I'll have to look it up and get back to you what her editing service is called. But it's really cool because she has this, it's like a 5-page form that he has to fill out as a beta reader. And it goes like part by part. characters, if they worked, if your introduction was, interesting, but it's literally 5 pages long. And of course it's typed up in kind of big print, but it's nice because it truly breaks down all of the things you want to look at: the character arcs, the world building, the engagement level, if there's types of dialogue that's not working, or particular characters that aren't interesting when they speak, if there are people that he truly dislikes in the story, and are these the actual bad guys, or are they badly written? And so to me, I'm like, it's a lot more precise than what she would get if you didn't give, especially these kids, some guidelines or guideposts to work with. And it's one of those things where I'm like, this is what I do now. I have 4 that I've modified and I use, because otherwise the feedback can be all over the place. Because you're coming from all these different kinds of backgrounds when you have beta readers, and you don't know if this is the first time they've done it or if they've had any experience at all. And so you want to help them be successful whenever you give them your work, so that you can be successful. So if you don't have a beta reader questionnaire right now, I just Google one and see if you can find one that you like.
Yeah. And actually this leads into kind of another question, because like I actually did a beta read / developmental edit sample for a Dorkable author. So here's a question. I've just had my proofreader go through and I'm reading my book out loud to triple check it. What are the values you find in reading your work out loud, developmental or otherwise?
Awesome question. Can I take it?
Go for it.
Cool. So when I copy edit, especially, I have kind of a 3 or 4 rounds or passes at it. And one of those is reading it out loud, because it is shocking how much I think I've already gone through 2-3 times and it's perfect, how much I'll catch by listening to it, by just reading it and hearing, oh, wait, I will catch the common words like conscious versus conscience, or, just that it sounds awkward and maybe the adjective is supposed to be before the verb, like just little things like that. It's truly valuable to read it out loud. And if you don't want to read it out loud to yourself, you can have the computer read it to you, like in Microsoft Word, or there are ways to do it, even I think through Alexa nowadays. So it's valuable to do that. And then as far as developmental editing, I haven't tried it. I've pretty much only stuck with copy editing for that.
Yeah, I think the Microsoft Word robot is probably my best friend, because I can listen to the flow of a scene while I'm, starting to prep dinner. You have to go through and alter your settings a little bit to find it. It's kind of buried in there, but if you just look up, Microsoft Word read out loud, it'll do awesome things. I feel like Scrivener has that now too. I might be wrong.
I do remember something about that. But yeah, I don't know offhand.
A lot of people love Scrivener, and I know that, again, this might be blasphemy, but it's not my favorite. But I know for the people it works, it really works, and I think it does read out loud to you. And it just what Kimberly said. I mean, you can hear sort of the ebb and flow of your sentences. Do they have structure, or you're writing sentences that are actually like 15 paragraphs long? You didn't realize it, but then you've heard "and" 17 times. Got it. Or like she said, conscious and conscious, or like my circumstance, if that writer had actually listened to it out loud, he would have recognized the word prostate instead of prostrate. Mm-hmm. And that wouldn't have been something that would have gotten all the way to me after, again, he'd had critique group members read that and just totally walk over it without even knowing that little snake was there.
Yeah, I think when it comes to a developmental edit, what I do, and it sounds funny explaining it to people because it just makes so much sense in my head, but when I say it out loud, I'm like, I sound like I'm schizophrenic. Is that I will speak it out loud in my head as I write. And so like as I'm doing an edit, I am inserting character voice, I am inserting narrator voice, and as I'm doing it, I am reading it as if I were saying it out loud. I'm having those hard stops at the period. I'm having that half a breath at the comma, pausing in confusion at the semicolon and then proceeding, those kinds of things. So like when I do that, it actually helps me do a better developmental edit, because when I'm leaving those line comments, I'm talking about pace and flow in the scene. I'm like, you have 3 short paragraphs or sentences back to back in this paragraph, and then one kind of long one. You can actually combine 2 of these because it's actually going to make for a better flow in the overall paragraph. Mm-hmm. And I only am able to do that because I essentially say it out loud in my head as I'm doing it, as if I were reading it out loud. If some of the people on the stream listened to me read the first page of chapter 7 of my novel during one of my editing streams, and the way that I read it was exactly how I read everybody else's stuff. And so it's a very interesting thing to try to explain to somebody. Like, if you're doing a self-edit and you're speaking it out loud, like, or if you don't like talking out loud, just do it in your head like you would read it. Make these stops, do the things that we actually learned how to do when learning to read, and do that.
I think another thing, it's very helpful even with early drafts, not just so much to get, does the sentence fit together right? But when you start reading, if you go through and say, okay, what was this paragraph trying to convince me of? Or if this is a dialogue between 2 people, what is it that they're trying to convince the other person of in that dialogue? Or what's the narrator trying to convince the reader of in this section of exposition? And so if you can go through and essentially find the thesis for each of those paragraphs as you read, you might realize the narrator is trying to convince you that this desert world is hot. And then the next paragraph is also the narrator trying to convince you that this desert world is hot. Then maybe the next paragraph is the narrator trying to convince you that this desert world is hot. Then you realize that you've got repetition that you can go through and start culling out on your own. And the same thing with arguments or conversations. If in this conversation, the detective is trying to convince the victim's sister that she's in danger. And then the victim's sister says, no, I'm not. And then the next bit of dialogue is the detective trying to convince her that she's in danger. And she says, no, I'm not. Then you realize that you're having stagnant conversations and that there's not evolution. And so that helps you go through and edit too. So even if you're just reading it in your head out loud, as you said, as you're writing it, it does help you be like, oh, okay, I've already kind of said this. And it provides you a way of, doing that self-editing that you maybe wouldn't have done if you were just straight writing.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. Not only the repetition, but just if you're listening to it and you find your mind wandering, clearly you may not be as engaging. So it's not maybe, the chapter might have a purpose and it might not be repetitive, but it might need to be written stronger.
Yeah, exactly.
So no fans of Scrivener so far. I haven't used Scrivener. I've actually done a video with a Grammarly versus pro writing in comparison. And then I've also done a video on how to set up pro writing aid to maximize it for you as an author. But I much prefer those. I prefer Grammarly for cleaning up a first draft. So I write it all in Grammarly, and it does enough it's about making it work for you rather than thinking it's going to do all the work for you. And then pro writing aid is to really kind of touch up a lot of those like problem areas. I ran mine through and I was just like, holy frick, I used this character's name like 8 times in 3 paragraphs. This is way too much. I haven't used Scrivener. It just sounds way too complicated because I literally just have Scrivener is in my head. Like, this is why people think I'm crazy. They're like, how do you keep track of literally everyone's story? I'm like, I basically have built-in Scrivener. So boom. I
want to give a plug for this. I can use it both at the beginning and at the end, but I really love Perfect It. And it's more of an editing tool versus a writing tool. But what I love about it is how much it'll just scroll through, especially in science fiction and fantasy, where we have these weird names and sometimes they will be just slightly different, where there's an I in the first version you use, but then an E in the next version. It'll say, similarly spelled things, but are also different. Which one do you want? And we can go through and fix all of them for you. And so it helps create that continuity especially with your made up words. And so that to me has been like a lifesaver when I'm going through, because I can just easily query the author and be like, which one of these versions was the one you really wanted? And then go from there without me having to walk through and do it. The little robot does it for me. So I'm like, thank you, little robot.
You're right. You, the real MVP. Aphrodite, I appreciate that. Yeah, I have to give the warning ahead of time. Otherwise, people do think I'm crazy. Then let's see. Linda has another. I jumped. I hate how it updates. Where is it? Almost there. Okay. Which kind of editor should I hire before submitting my manuscript to an agent publisher? I've heard about developmental editors, copy editors, acquiring editors. Or should I hire one person who does all of those at once? How about a consultant who works specifically on query with the first 50 pages? Should I use an editor's help on just the first 50 pages or the whole manuscript before submitting? That is a great big question. Definitely a hard no on the all of the things. Kimberly, I'll start this off real quick because hard no on all of the things. With I think that you can get away with it with a copy and line edit combo if you're willing to be patient for the amount of work that it takes to do that level of editing. For example, I finished up a developmental edit for a client. She went back, did the edits that I had suggested, and then sent it back to me. And then I reread through it because I still had the complimentary edit on the contract. And at the end of it, I said that these 6 chapters need to be rewritten. And she was like, great, will you do them? And I said, no. And that was it's not because I didn't love the story. It's not that I didn't love it's not that I hated the characters. It's actually because I knew I was too close to it at that point, where if I went back through, I was going to miss something, because I had read through this so many times and my brain literally has it ingrained. So I remember almost everything. And so that becomes a problem, is that you get writing blindness as an author and as an editor if you stare at something for too long. And so it is super important that you don't have one editor doing all of the editing. 2 editors minimum, I would say. One for a developmental edit, and then a completely different editor for copy and line edit. Then probably somebody completely different for proofread. Because proofreading is not editing. It's a different thing. As far as it goes with submitting a manuscript to an agent or a publisher, I'm of the opinion that it's 100% entirely up to you whether you want to do that. Because once you've submitted to an agent and a publisher and it's accepted, they're going to do that for you. There is going to be a developmental edit. There is going to be copy and line edit. You don't have to have it done beforehand. Can it spruce it up? Can it help get some of those big plot holes out of the way if you haven't addressed them? Yes. But in my mind, it is entirely up to you and your budget whether you want to do that, because it's going to go through another developmental edit. So that's me on my soapbox, and I'm done. So rock, paper, scissors for whoever wants it next.
It was a very long question. So I am going to grab it because this is a little bit in my wheelhouse. I definitely would suggest doing a first 10, first 15 page, just clean up, polish, because you're probably going to send those in first. And then if the agent is interested, they will ask you for the entire manuscript, or they're going to ask you for an extended summary. And then, once you get there, you can deal with there. But I am very hesitant to do a full on, production level edit where you get the full dev, you get a full line, you get a full copy and a full proof. Because at that point, what is that, agent really going to do for you? What is that publisher going to do for you? And if they're not going to do anything besides undo a bunch of work you just paid for, we're talking about thousands of dollars worth of work that you just paid for.
Yep.
You've sort of spun your, excuse me, you've sort of spun your wheels, and you've spent a bunch of money that's probably quite dear. I don't know about you, but that can rack up part of my kid's college fund, and I don't want to do that if it's not necessary, or won't pay me back. So I would definitely suggest trying to look at being frugal, because as the Bard just kind of indicated, larger publisher is going to redo these activities. And so your goal is to make sure that it looks somewhat polished, and that the section that you give them is cohesive, that it is engaging in that work. So I definitely would suggest doing a much more concentrated effort on those. And then having beta readers, or having your I would call them alpha readers for your early draft. Having people who actually like this go through and tell you if it's engaging as far as the book goes. But if it's the same kind of circumstance, if they're saying there's things that are missing, yes, go ahead and get a full thing before a full developmental edit or a manuscript evaluation before you send it. But you don't want to do the line edit for them, the copy and the proof, because again, if you do that, they're just going to do it again. And what you hear from one professional, it may be their subjective viewpoint. It may be different from what the publisher is going to want to do. Or for example, if the publisher has a particular style guide that they use, or an in-house style guide that isn't exactly the same as the Chicago Manual of Style, then any changes you made to that with a copy editor that's independent, that's following just CMOS, is going to have to be redone by somebody else using that in-house style guide. So I'm just convincing you not to spend your money, but I think it's very important that you don't waste. And again, what you're trying to send that agent, or if it's a medium or small press, what you're trying to send them is just the point that you can write, the point that you've got an interesting story. And then if they agree with you, they'll take it and they'll work with it. So I know there are people out there that do the full rigmarole and get all the way down to proof, but I definitely would not suggest doing that for yourself, especially if you haven't sent it already. You can do some tests, you can kind of send stuff over, and occasionally people will be nice enough to say, it's just not clean enough for us to read. You won't get a form letter. They'll tell you, you need to clean this up a little bit. If you're actually getting that, then yes, definitely go through and get editors. But if you're not seeing that, or if you're getting positive feedback that says, I really like this idea, it's just not what I'm selling right now, or we just picked up something that was very similar, or we like this idea but X, Y, and Z, that doesn't have to do with the actual value of your manuscript, then you're probably on the right track already.
Yeah, Shannon, all those were great points, and I'd say I agree with the recommendation is spend your money where you're going to get the most value. So the authors I've worked with in the past that were intending to query, I have helped them with just beta reading or manuscript evaluations rather than a full developmental edit, and then I've helped also with some of the copy editing to make those first few chapters polished. But otherwise, I would agree with you completely.
Yeah. All right. So we hadn't any questions. Aphrodite says that we're all awesome. So appreciate that. I actually had to skip a question because the second question on here was, should I get my book or edited before I send it to an agent? Linda's way ahead of it. Way to go. All that work on that PowerPoint for nothing.
All that work.
How do I find great book editing services? Because this is kind of tricky, because to me, there are the first thing that comes up for most people is like, well, I got on Fiverr and it was like $25 and they totally edited like 120,000 words in 3 days. I'm like, great. Imagine what you could have had if you had actually spent the money and hadn't been a penny pincher and loved your book more than your wallet or just a discount product. And I get it, because I started off on Fiverr. Fiverr was incredibly helpful to kind of get me started, and I figured out that I loved doing this. But what most people don't know, because they're not freelancing, is that Fiverr is taking 20% off the top. And so if you're only charging, $25, then you have that you have 20% off the top of that. And so you're getting paid less than a penny per word for the amount of work that you're doing. Same thing with Upwork, which both of those places I've been on, I've used. It was an experience. It got me to understand a little bit more about editing in general. But the freelance mills, as I call them, are absolutely brutal and not necessarily going to be the best place to find a good quality editor. Someone who has experience in those things. More often than not, it's somebody just starting off, looking to get their feet wet, looking to kind of get into editing. That is what is usually on there. And unfortunately, Shelley's not here because she actually she has a huge clientele on Upwork and has used it successfully. So I would have loved to have her feedback on this, and I may bring it up in another stream. But what are your guys' opinions on this?
I avoid Fiverr. I know Fiverr's, sorry to jump in, Kimberly. I know Fiverr is trying to do more to improve their image because it sort of recognizes a swamp across the board. But I think where they've mostly focused is on graphic design and some other areas besides editing, and I would say, you know, other professional endeavors. I feel the same way about Upwork. I feel like it's kind of a slog, and I went a couple of times to you know, try to get clients from there, and I felt like every time it was sort of like a waste of effort for me to go through and write up a response to their query. What I do think Upwork is very good with is getting copywriting and then editing on more industry type materials and not so much novels. And so if I'm not sure what all she was doing, but if you've got if you're looking for copywriting, or if you're writing nonfiction and you're trying to get advertisement materials, I think you could definitely find editors who focus in on that kind of thing on Upwork. But if you're looking for, say, novels and romance, you're less likely to find somebody who's of value there. What I would definitely suggest, and not just because I'm a member, but the Editorial Freelancers Association has a listing, and I should remember this because I rep them recently. I know there's thousands and thousands of editors on there, and you can go through the search and you can click on your specific genre or the kind of editing you're trying to get, and it'll populate the results with people who are very specific to your niche. And so that's beneficial, and you can find a lot of people who are, you know, part of a professional organization and who specialize in your category. So that's where I would suggest going.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm an EFA member, and I think that you have a sense of quality, but I still think that it's on the authors to vet the professionals. It's important to make sure, I think it's important for the relationship, just that there's a good match of expectations, and you clearly talk about what you're looking for and you know, what type of editing, because as you said in the very beginning, you can't get one editor to do all those different skill sets, or you will end up with a low quality product. So vetting the professionals wherever you're looking. Word of mouth is huge. So if you're in writing groups and online and hearing from other authors, that's helpful to at least get a referral that you know someone has had a good experience with. And then I think the other question is about like you're kind of subcontracting out. So if you think of yourself as a subcontractor and you're looking for someone to help maybe with the cover and somebody to help with as a beta reader, or to help you with some of the differences in developmental editing. So to tackle that, like, is my dialogue authentic, or you know, is the world building realistic? And so I'm totally rambling here, and I'm sorry, but, but I think it's really important to make sure not only that you have that good relationship, like that you have a partnership between author and editor, but that you've done the homework and you've vetted that you're working with a professional that in the end is going to deliver quality.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is shop around and make sure you're getting either you're conversing with, you know, 3 or 4 different people for each type of service, so that you can get an idea of how they communicate. Because I'm a teacher, by heart, and I will sit there and I will pontificate for hours, and you may not want that. You may want someone who's way more succinct, or if you've been doing this for a while, you want somebody to just say, these are the problems, I really don't need to hear X, Y, and Z, even though that might be, you know, this particular editor or my way of communicating. So you find somebody who speaks your language. And I know we all speak English, but we speak English differently. Anybody who has unfortunately had to navigate with somebody who doesn't speak the same English as them knows exactly what I'm talking about, where they're telling you to take a left 3 turns too early. And and so you find the person who communicates the right way with you and that you're comfortable with taking feedback from. So that's, I think, what Kimberly is trying to get at. And I totally wholeheartely agree. Like, find a number of editors to interview, essentially, or to start email engagement with at least. And then if you're going to get, if you're going to get like the first 3,000 words, the first 1,000 words edited as a sample, you can see how they do that, how they communicate. If they're leaving commentary to explaining, if that's what you want, great. If that's not what you want, great too. Figure out who's doing what.
Yeah, I think that is really important, is the samples, just to see the style, because there are editors who will point out mistakes without providing suggested solutions. There are editors who will not be as diplomatic, and so depending on, you know, how seasoned of an author you are and the way that you can take criticism, if you want, you know, just give me the facts or just give me the problems and I can handle, you know, coming up with it, or if you are less experienced and want some suggestions, not even to take those, you can read the suggestions and then it inspires ideas of your own. But it's important to understand when you start working with an editor, what type of editor you're getting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, sorry, go on.
Well, I was just going to say, you know, most of the time when someone, when I work with somebody, the one of the first things that is addressed is they're like, okay. And I could just hear them like pumping themselves up before I'm like, okay, just do it. And I have to come in and this is where I put on my writing therapist hat. I'm like, no, shh, come back. And it's much more along the lines of like, that is maybe what you're looking for. I was like, but that is not how I roll. Like, my role is not to come in, because I'm an author too. Like, I don't want somebody to come in and poo-pooey all over my book and just shred it to pieces. I want them to give me feedback. I want them to help me make it better. That's why I'm paying them. And so that is what I try and do with the clients, whether that's through a sample edit or through a full-on developmental edit or the coaching aspect of it. That's where the coaching comes into play. Why I enjoy coaching more is because I get to help people enhance their book and help them develop an author mindset that helps them move forward in their writing process, developing their author skills, developing their writing skills, teaching them everything, the lessons that I've learned over 14 years of writing, and helping them make their book better. And that comes through, and thankfully that I have the ability to adapt to an author's voice or style of writing when I'm doing the edit. So that way I can go, okay, here's what my suggestion would be, and it fits within the context of their style. They still may change it. They still may do something different with it. But like Kimberly said, it can be to inspire them, be like, oh, I hadn't thought of doing it that way before. That's interesting. Oh, I can totally see how I could do this, and this now with the story. And the samples are the most important thing. Like, I think people think it's sacrilege to like ask somebody for a sample of their work, especially multiple people at the once. It's like we're cheating on them. We're like, I'm so sorry. You know, it's like, it's okay. Like, we expect to be asked for samples. I know some editors charge for samples. Others will give away free samples. And some will do it just based on a word count. You know, it depends from editor to editor. That's why you ask. That's why you converse with them and figure out, are they the right fit for me? Do they even like my genre? You know, like that's huge. It's like that you're essentially paying for a really grumpy beta reader at that point. Like, if they hate your genre, then they're not going to be super helpful.
And I've had that happen where I've gotten a developmental edit and the client had worked with somebody who was recommended to them that didn't actually work on mysteries. And so they got halfway through the process of the developmental edit with this first editor and said, we're just going to go ahead and stop because it's very clear that you're not going to like what I write. And this person was they're kind of an academic, and they're like, you very obviously aren't into this, and you don't have an understanding of this genre, and we're gonna quit. And he went and wanted to find somebody else and almost didn't do it. Someone had to convince him to find an editor because he was certain we were all charlatans. Excuse me. Based upon his experience with somebody just taking a job where they had no interest in it. They had no business doing that particular, selection. And that's disheartening, because you will see that too, where, we'll have, unfortunately, lots of Facebook screeds about how editors are useless and things like that. And it comes from, in some cases, people don't like the sticker shock. And in some cases, because there have been people out there who have called themselves editors and either have taken jobs unwisely or have not actually performed the duty that they should have been doing. So it's absolutely imperative to shop around. One of the things that I do want to say about samples, try to get samples on the same section. Don't give multiple, chapters, 1 over here, 3 over here, 17 over here to different editors, because then you can't really see their responses on the text. You're getting, you're giving them completely different content than the result you may get, or the decision you make might be because you just really like chapter 17, and, Jane Doe over here got it, but John Smith over here had chapter 3, which you kind of hated anyway. So, you don't like him, but he might've been the editor that really fits your style better. So try to use one of your early chapters and try to give them the same section. Definitely don't start in the middle of a chapter. That starts looking like a Franken edit. And if you guys don't know what that is, we'll talk about that. But it kind of looks like you're trying to grift us. So avoid giving, mid-chapter, stopping mid-sentence or anything like that inside of your section. And then again, for your own benefit, use the same chapter for all of your sample edits.
Yeah. So I think that'll be a good place to transition to one of the questions that Aphrodite had. Before we do that, we're kind of in the hour time slot. And so I want to take a minute for everybody watching the chat to kind of hear from both Shannon and Kimberly a little bit more about what it is that they do, charge, their expertise, that kind of stuff. So Kimberly, let's start with you, and then Shannon, we'll have you go next.
Okay, great, thanks. So I started Revision Division as my freelance editing business. When I started, I had only been trained and experienced on copy editing, so I stuck with that for a while, but I'm truly passionate about developmental editing. So I went back and got more education and experience in that, and that's what I have been focusing on for the last couple of years. And then even more to, in the beginning, when as an editor, you're taking jobs as they come to you, whether or not you're in love with the genre or the, like I edited a thriller. That's not my favorite. And so now I can pinpoint what I'm truly passionate about and good at. And so now I have that freedom and flexibility to turn away things that I really shouldn't be editing. And so I stick with romance. I say all heat levels of it, but I definitely love like the steamy contemporary, the sweet, the trying to think historical. I'm probably less passionate about some of the Christian romance or the heavy erotica, but I have had experience with the full spectrum. So once I realized, where I wanted to focus my attention and really cultivate the conversations with my ideal clients, and that's what I also tell the authors is find your ideal reader, know who you are planning to market to, from the beginning, so that we can edit with the right tone, especially with some of the nonfiction that I edit for publishers. That's very important to have that consistent voice and know your audience and the tone of the book. Over the years, I have, really focused on developmental editing and romance, and been very happy with the people that I've worked with, the repeat business, the referrals, and just the warm writing community that I've found online and in my local community. It's just been phenomenal. And I love like sessions like this. Thank you so much for putting it together and giving me, you know, the time to be able to geek out over editing, because Lord knows my family and friends are tired of hearing about, did you read this book? Or let me tell you why this movie is, you know, not as good as the book. And let's
yes. Yes. Yeah. Authors and editors know that pain on a deep personal level.
So it's been so enjoyable, and I feel fortunate, especially in the times that we're facing now with challenges, that I am still able to work, to be at home, and to be here for my rambunctious children that need to figure out distance learning, and still be able to provide for my family. So
yeah, definitely.
Awesome. So I'm Shannon Winton, and I'm the lead editor for Untitled Editing. We take a bite out of bad writing, so your story doesn't suck. I got my start actually as a writer, and I was in a critique group and had been, this is about 5 years ago. One of the members, his name is Jason Adelot. He runs Gray Gecko Press, which is a small press that was housed out of Houston, is now out of Florida. And he kind of had us read his third zombie novel in one of his award-winning series. And I found all these issues, and I was like, but hey, I think that you could fix it just by doing this, this, and this. And so one of the things that I didn't realize is that, you know, when people read stories and they give advice, most of the time their advice sucks, but mine is usually spot on. And so he kind of threw his paper down and he was like, you need to be a developmental editor. I don't think you realize, but you worked on these books that I've published, and you've been doing this extremely valuable service for for my publishing company for free without realizing it. And if you don't have a small business license by the next time we see each other next month, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And so it was very flattering. And I'm like, no. I don't have any background. I'm a nurse. I don't know how to edit. And he goes, yes, you do. Yes, you do. You just don't know you do yet. And so I had a whole bunch of people, which was delightful, inside of a room telling me how to start my business, looking up business names, and really forcing me through. And I went, okay, calm down, slow down. And I looked up the Editorial Freelancers Association. Essentially, I was trying to find editing organizations, figure out how I could get education. And so before I actually started the business, I did about 6 months of education to make sure that, hey, I'm actually worthwhile. And I did some, I found mentors to help me through and to guide me through being a freelancer. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to start my business. My previous life, I was a nurse. I was doing utilization review, and I've also done human clinical trials. And so it's way different than editing, especially when I'm like, all I do is love books. I mean, it's not the same thing. Well, yeah, it actually is. Loving books is a great prerequisite. So my first business was called Novel Nurse, and I loved it. I had a really cute, icon for my business, but the problem was a lot of people who were sort of directed to it or who were really interested in that name, they thought I was working on nonfiction or that I focused in on medical textbooks. And so I've recently rebranded so that I can make sure that I'm hitting my science fiction and fantasy authors who I love and who I really, really love to work with, so that you guys can more easily find me. But when I first started, I very luckily had a community already in Houston of people who went, oh, I can pay you now, which is a wonderful thing to have. And so I started essentially with a lot of locals and then word of mouth. And then at this point, I'll usually get people finding me on the EFA, or they'll find me on my website, or they will have been looking for a plot consultation or storyboard consultation, which I know some people provide, but it's got all sorts of different names. And so they'll have looked in a particular version of that, and they'll have found me there. And fortunately, it seems like something that not a lot of people do is that particular kind of writing coaching. But since I do, they find me and we get started. So I don't do as much coaching, I think, as your Bard over here, but I do enough that I can definitely say, hey, this is going to work for you. That's not going to work for you. Or if you've just got an inkling of something that you want to write, but you don't have a full plot, I can help you work through it, and we can get you a full outline and then a chapter by chapter break.
Uh-oh. May have lost Shannon. Yay for technical difficulties. Well, while we are waiting for hopefully Shannon to come back, I'll just kind of dive in real quick. I basically did everything.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but can I circle back? Because I don't think I answered your original question about, we have Shannon back.
Sorry.
Yeah, Shannon's back.
the internet trolls. Sorry, the internet.
Yeah.
But I hope you heard all that. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish. So I do developmental editing. I do some writing coaching. I do storyboard consultation. I've relatively recent in the last year or so gotten into copywriting, and so I'll do some copywriting, especially website content, and then also synopsis and blurbs for your self-published book, because it can be extremely difficult for an author who's really close to the content to write their own synopsis or write their own blurb and really grab a reader's attention, because they'll be like, I have to tell you a story. The story is actually 100,000 words long. So let me see if I can put that on the back of the book, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, definitely feel that. All right, go ahead, Kimberly. You finishing?
Yeah, thank you. I just forgot that you had asked about like rates and what we do. And so I just wanted to direct people to the Revision Division website to find that, because not everybody posts the rates, but I do. So like I said, I charge by the hour and for copy editing and developmental editing. And I also do professional beta reading and the manuscript evaluations.
Awesome.
I also have my rates on the website. If you go to a particular service and you scroll down near the bottom, I give you a cost estimate. Essentially, like I have my early range and then my lower end range and then my higher end range. And unfortunately, I'll kind of need to see your manuscript to give you where it'll fit inside of there. But it does help you figure out if I'm inside your budget. Nice. And that's at itudeediting.com.
Yeah, so I basically did everything the opposite of you guys by doing it like all wrong. Like that's how my editing journey started off. Like 2018, I was like, I kind of want to do freelancing, but I don't know what to do because I hate the thought of copywriting. And I was already doing, I was on Wattpad at the time, creating angsty, tormentful fan fiction for my readers. And I had kind of gotten into doing book reviews. And so I was going through and I was hitting plots, character, story, kind of overall. And I was just able to kind of like see the story and see through some of those things. And I was like, wow, I wonder if there's any sort of editing like this that I could do. And I had never heard of developmental editing before. And then I found that and I was like, just mind blown. I was like, I need to find out more about this. So I started looking into it. And then in 2019, January, February, I kind of got on Fiverr and I did some Fiverr gigs doing developmental editing. I was like, I absolutely love this. Like I'm helping people with their stories and some of them were rough. Like really rough, but I loved it so much because I saw the potential that it had. And I'm like, this book is going to be fan-freaking-tastic once you fix some of these bigger picture issues. And so looking at that, I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. Never ran a business in my life. And so I was just like, how hard can it be? All the YouTube people say it's awesome. I can make 6 figures in like 3 months. And so, yeah. And so I just kind of dove in head first. And that's when I started the Editing Bard. And I've absolutely loved doing the developmental editing. And especially when I added in the coaching aspect of it, it's just been fun. I talked about this on a stream with the Adorkable author and What Now, but essentially like the way that I edit is all by feel. Like it's just a feeling that I have specifically with science fiction and fantasy. That's what I read. This shelf, that's all that. This just Tolkien, all of the Tolkiens. That is what I specialize in, but I've also learned through working at the publisher how to help people with nonfiction. And really, it's just about helping people tell their story. And that aspect of it is across the board. It doesn't matter what genre it is. I can help somebody tell their story. Give me 30 minutes with them, and then I will be able to map out the entire thing. And so that's what I've enjoyed so much about doing the developmental editing and the coaching aspect of it. And like I said earlier, like I charge a flat rate for all of the developmental edits. I have an hourly rate for the coaching that I do, and I've kind of broken it down. And then I have a full-on mentorship with me that spans the course of the year. And during that year, we work on first draft, second draft, building an author platform, and submitting it to the publisher that I work with. And it's not a guarantee that you're going to be edited, or well, it is guaranteed that you're going to get edited, but not guaranteed that it's going to be published. But you have a higher likelihood because I know what they're looking for, and I can help you kind of tailor the story to fit within those guidelines. That one's obviously a little bit more expensive because it's going to be a lot more of my time, but I've enjoyed the aspect of working with people on developmental editing and just watching them grow as authors. It's just been so much fun. So that is our shameless self-promotion. Let's get to the question that I wanted to dive into. And we have several questions that I want to get caught up on. So Aphrodite would like to know, how do we truly define what difference edits are? And the easy answer is yes. And then there's more complicated and in-depth questions. Shannon, why don't we start with you?
Well, I think it's a delightful question because unfortunately, with something as prescriptive as editing, we don't have clear definitions. So one editor may consider proofreading to be the same thing that I would be.
Uh-oh. Man, that cliffhanger though. Pause for effect.
Proofreading.
Oh man. I'm gonna let Kim answer and see if the internet will stick with me.
I can hear you now. Do you want to continue?
Okay, well, I feel bad if I'm repeating, but unfortunately, again, with something as prescriptive as editing, we are not very clearly defined as far as what our roles are. And so there are a lot of people out there that consider proofreading to be the same thing that I would consider to be like copy editing. And it's really funny. It's almost like a generational divide over who does what or what their background is, because proofreading, it's reading the proof copy before it goes to print. And so you're looking for issues that are more formatting related, or, accidentally having a word or a letter be cut off at the end of a line. And so it has more to do with the polish of, again, the print copy of something. Whereas if you look at somebody who comes more so from an imprint or an ebook or some other form of online media, then proofreading oftentimes is just looking over it for last minute errors before you actually publish it online. And so you're going to have to go to each particular editor's website to figure out which is which on there, because again, we may be completely different. And I've known some people who consider developmental editing and content editing all to be the same thing, and will actually update and alter text, the actual manuscript copy, whereas I will occasionally show an example of how to fix something inside of my developmental edit, and I will clearly highlight it inside of your text, but I do not go through and update and alter and fix those things for you the same way that other editor would. My developmental editing is basically a gigantic critique, and I will have commentary along the sides to show you examples of where things aren't working and explanations of why, and then a very large editorial letter. And I love having conversations, so I would want to have a contact with you, maybe a phone call, so we can discuss how to fix things if for whatever reason you have more questions and I haven't addressed them inside my letter. But for me, developmental editing can cover, your world building. It can cover your characters. It can cover your themes, your arc, your writing style. It can cover whether your dialogue is working or not working, inconsistencies in your pacing or your plot. It can cover whether or not there are logical problems, either in your world building or character decisions and that kind of stuff. So it's basically the meat and bones of the story itself. And then if I'm seeing, overused words, I'll go ahead and mark it, but that's not my focus. And then if I'm seeing, specific spelling errors over and over again, I'll flag it for you inside of a comment, but I'm not going to go through and fix it. Whereas with line editing, I'm looking line by line to figure out if the flow works for your story, and then I will update it. I will physically change the document so that it works better. And that still kind of covers some of those content things. If there's something wrong with your pacing or your flow, or we're looking at exposition that maybe can be cut down, I will go through and physically or manually do those. But that's totally different than, say, a copy edit where the focus is on your grammar, your punctuation, and cleaning up the sentences. So in line editing, if I see stuff that's incorrectly spelled on first pass, yeah, I'll go through and fix it. But my goal is to make sure that the flow of the story on a line level works. But I won't necessarily look at a formatting issue where if you've got, italics inside of quotes, is that treated differently than italics outside of quotes and things like that. So there's demarcations in mine that may be different than what Kimberly does. But again, you're going to have to look at every editor specifically and see what their definition is. Unfortunately, there's not a clear, true line in the sand kind of thing for every editor.
Because we like to make it simple.
Yeah, it's just not that standardized. And it's really, it's an individual choice of what services are offered. And so that's why it's important to look at an editor's website. And when you have maybe a discovery call or you talk about a sample, that you use the language from that editor's website because of the differences in the industry of content editing and substantive and developmental. And so along those same lines as Shannon, with a developmental edit, I will look at the plot, the pace, character development, and I'm forgetting a whole bunch. I have just as you said, the story elements. What was that?
People gonna love this love story. That's what you're looking at.
Yeah. The other thing for the genre, if it fits, if it's, I'm not trying to make people make it formulaic, but there are expectations. And if you don't have a happy ending, then you did not write a romance. Right. So yes, I look at the genre expectations, some of those obligatory scenes that are expected. And just it's more about the flow, and from the opening, have you hooked someone? Do you have good transitions? Do you have don't have unanswered questions? Make sure that your plot is still there, because it's not just about the sex scenes. So that's developmental editing. And then I do have the same distinction between line editing and copy editing. So copy editing, I look strictly at just, is it, punctuation, grammar, spelling, usage, have you swapped words incorrectly? And I will help with repetition or pet words. But with developmental editing, it is, like you said, it's this, I write a huge revision summary that talks about global revisions that are needed, like throughout the manuscript. There are issues that need to be addressed with if there's too much telling, or if if it's with dialogue tags, or just the main. I try to focus on just like maybe the top 3 to 5 things that would make the manuscript better throughout. In the global revision, in the revision summary, I'll talk about what are the global revisions that would make it better overall. And then within the manuscript, I will use the comments to point out examples of what I'm talking about in the revision summary. So it's a huge value for your writing career, because I have had repeat author clients, and I'm just astounded from one book to the next how much they've grown and how much better it is. So that part is really exciting and rewarding.
Yeah, I agree. I only do developmental editing. I don't do copy editing, and technically I do some line edit where I will talk about the pace and the flow on a sentence by sentence or paragraph level, because to me it fits my personality with how I see the story and the overall feel for it. And so I'll typically go through, and I have a report that I work up at the end of it that is broken down into different sections, like the overall pace, the overall flow, the overall characters. Were they likable? Were they engaging? Were they too tropey? And I like pointing out the tropes to the authors, because they're probably thinking like, oh, this is the most original character since the history of ever. And it's like, no, actually they fit in this type of trope that we've seen before, because it's all writing has been done before to some extent. You're just throwing your unique spin on it, which is okay. I go into the world building, and then I talk also about, their audience. Like, who's your audience? What are they going for? Are they going to be hooked on it based on my knowledge of what your genre is? Sometimes the answer is no, because whatever this is not in English and no one is going to understand it. Or there's like, yes, this is absolutely, people will throw themselves on top of this book to buy it. It'll be like toilet paper hoarders. Like, people are just going to flood the bookstores and just want it.
Yeah.
And so when I'm looking at a developmental edit, I'm looking at all those things. Particularly what I specialize in is the world building, because it is one of the most intimidating aspects for writing for authors. And I can come in and go, okay, here's how we world built. Here's the elements that you can, and it doesn't matter what genre it is. It's in the finer details of world building. It's actually not the bigger things. It's the little things that make the world feel realistic to the reader. That is what I can help people with. And that's what my focus is on, is that a lot of my feedback actually has to do with the world building that they're doing. If there's something lacking, it's because they've put their characters in an echo chamber and they've had this dialogue for like 3.5 pages. And then they're like, and then they remembered that they were in the park surrounded by people. I'm like, how did they forget that they were in a park surrounded by people? Like, no one does this. And so that's a lot of what I focus on, and what I enjoy, because those finer details are what add to the world and make it feel immersive to the reader. Yeah, so I absolutely love doing that. That's what I like to focus on with the developmental edits. And like you said, Kimberly, watching the author grow over that time span. So like, I've been working with an author as part of my mentorship since October of last year. And the difference between her writing then to the introduction and first chapter that she tagged me in just this week was just night and day difference. I was just like, I mean, I couldn't even comment and edit. It was basically just me writing in the comments, incoherent screaming, yes! And with like a little emoji. Because I was just like, this is it. Like, this is your story. This is what you've been working towards for the last 8 months. 8 months? Well, what month is it now? April? 6 months. 6 months. And so I was like, and she wrote her first draft in 3 months. Completed. 100,000 words. 3 months. Done. And like, that is the power of having a coach. That is a power of having a developmental editor, is they can help you find your author voice. Okay, there was another.
I want to back on that though before you get to another question about the tropes, because that's so important for romance. It seems like a thing that people will roll their eyes at, but it's helpful when you're going to market, that you're reaching the right people. So those tropes serve a purpose, and you want to use them. Don't be afraid of them.
Oh, I've got a plug. I mean, I feel really bad because of all the things that have happened with the RWA, and I don't know what parts of the country you guys are in, but our individual RWA groups, there's 3 of them in Houston, they're still going, and they've always been so helpful at providing workshops and seminars. And yeah, they're at cost, but they bring in these professionals that can really help you tailor your marketing and really help you understand, like, return on investment if this is something that's brand new to you, and how to advertise. And they've just been a hub of just valuable information. And I've just got to hand it to romance writers, because when we start off, you don't think about these things, but you guys do, and you guys know what you're talking about, and y'all are firecrackers. And if you're like, this is a millionaire romance and not a billionaire romance, and they are 2 different things, and I'm like, wow. I mean, I really wish in a bizarre way that some of the genres that I work in are that, I don't want to say prescriptive, but so they're clear. They give you this very specific path to walk down to success. And I think that's delightful, and just, hats off to you guys. And hats off to you for helping people fit inside of those genres so well, Kimberly, because I mean, you're giving them the guidance that'll actually get them there. So if you're brand new and you're not sure, I would say definitely find other romance writers. Definitely come find Kimberly, because she can help you make sure that your book can be placed in the appropriate spot so that you can actually get the reader's eyes on there.
Thank you. Yeah, I've helped steer people when it was not exactly romance and not willing to go to what it took to get there, to bringing romance into what it is they actually wrote, and just helping with those elements. So I've done, romantic suspense and psychological thrillers that kind of thought it was a romance, but not quite. But there is a blend of the genres where whatever you're writing, you want to do it well. And so thank you. That's a really good point.
Yeah. Heather has a question. So are any of you members of any other editing orgs? Which of them do you guys prefer? I'll just throw this out there. I'm not currently outside of like the Facebook group that I run, like that's the only editorial this association that I'm associated with. At this point, like I want to get into what was it, EFA, and get a part of that. It's mainly just been from the financial aspect of it. Like investing in it requires a certain amount of money that I do not currently have. But yeah, that's definitely something that I want to get more into and get my name out there. You guys, I know I are part of at least one.
Do you want me to go first, Shannon?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think I'm only part of 3 currently. I may have let a few lapse as I figured out what I wanted. So EFA definitely, and that is my favorite, just from a support of editors and the courses and webinars that they offer as well. I constantly use the rates page to help authors figure out, what to expect from a budgeting standpoint. Then I started out with copy editing. I was part of ACES, and I also like the Ally Network. And then I'm part of Maryland Writers Association, which is not necessarily an editors organization, but like I said, I enjoy that community aspect. So I'm active there as well.
Very cool.
I think you've just about covered all of the good ones, although I don't know much about Maryland. So I'm still a member of the Editorial Freelancers Association. Like you, I was part of a number when I first started, primarily because you do get discounts for education. So I was part of ACES, which I want to say it's the American Copy Editors Society, but they've also recently just gone down to the acronym because they've expanded their focus on other things too. But they have a certificate program that is excellent for copy editing. And I definitely would recommend that if you're looking to go into this and you don't have a formal MBA or a background in English literature that comes from, a college degree. I would definitely suggest, I think if you do, I would go ahead and suggest it because there's a difference between academic and professional. And so I really focus on that. And then the Editorial Freelancers Association educational activities have always been awesome. When I was a newbie editor, I started going to the meetings, and that's kind of how I ended up being a coordinator for the local chapter, was because I really enjoyed, the bi-monthly meetings and getting to see the editors in the different areas, and then also to hear the speakers talking about different aspects of editing. And their education, the developmental education courses, there's 3 of them. They do them, I think, twice a year. Those were invaluable, just making sure that I felt like I knew what I was doing. And then if I wasn't 100% sure on a particular thing, that I had professionals that I could talk to and get feedback from. They also have forums where we can discuss things with each other outside of the workshops and education, so that if you have a question or if you're like, hey, this weird thing is going on with this client, what should I do? They provide support that way. I know this is kind of weird, but I really enjoy editing Facebook groups. A few years ago, there weren't quite as many, and now there's quite a few, and it's awesome because there's now niches. So I've got my general editing Facebook, yeah. And then I've got my developmental editing Facebook groups. And I really want to plug Editor Alliance. That was one of the first ones that I got into, that it was one of those places where especially new editors and old editors were kind of rubbing elbows. And so if there were questions that were a little bit more niche that I didn't feel comfortable putting up on the EFA, like crap, there's this word, it's made up. Should I hyphenate? Should I not hyphenate? What's your opinion? And just get the feedback from a bunch of other professionals. That group especially was fantastic for that. And then also helping set up my contract. I would plug Freelancers Union, which is not a editing specific group, but it's helpful from a business perspective. And that one is totally free. And they also have, information on what should be inside of your contract, even though it's not specific to editing, to cover yourself and then cover your clients to make sure that you guys both address what your expectations are. Freelancers Union is awesome.
Yeah, contracts are so important for both the editor and the author. And just to briefly touch on that before diving into the next question, since we only have about 15 minutes left. When you guys are looking for an editor, make sure that you ask them if they have a contract. It's important. Someone who's brand new to editing is likely to not have a contract. But if they have a contract, make sure that you look it over, and that gives the how-tos and the whatnots and the expectations of, like, if you're thinking you're getting one thing and their contract clearly states something different, that may be a problem. You may not want to go with that person. So just keep that in mind when you're looking for samples and you're talking with people. Like, what is it that you do? Look over the contract before you sign it. And make sure that there is something in there. Like in my contract, there's a place that either person, the editor or the author, can cancel the service at any time given at least 3 days notice. And that's super important because I want them there. And I make it abundantly clear that all of the suggestions, all of the things that I give them are theirs, especially upon completion of the edit. Between that time, I'm still getting paid. The ideas are still my own. I'm merely suggesting them, but when the contract's done, they're yours. I have no use for them. So go forth and do your thing.
I definitely agree. Oh, sorry, Kimberly, were you going to say something?
No, go ahead.
Okay, I definitely agree. You want to make sure that there. I think it's called a kill clause, but it sounds really ominous. But say something happens and you can't go through with this edit, you want to make sure that you have a way, even if you've already signed it, to end the contract. And if you do, if there are repercussions or there's still fees to be paid, that's clearly delineated so you don't get tricked or surprised. I do a 14-day. Some of my stuff is way farther out, it sounds like, but just to have something that says, you can say no even after we've signed this contract, and this is how you do it. And then from the editor, I haven't experienced this, but I've heard of editors who they'll get into a contract and the person that they're working with has become abusive, or they get into the content of the book and certain things maybe weren't disclosed, like very graphic rape scenes or things that they are morally opposed to. I had one prospective client where I looked at the sample and I said, no, this book is racist. I can't take you. And if I hadn't known that and I'd started working on it, I still would have told them, we're going to go ahead and we're going to kill the contract because I morally am opposed to this. And that clause protects both me as an editor and it protects you as a client. If you get in and then say maybe you see your editor do things that you're not really interested in, you can go ahead and say, we're going to end this relationship. You don't have a clause in there, then you maybe aren't protected. The intellectual property clause is a really important one. Hopefully no editor is going to claim intellectual property over your book after they have finished and after you've paid. So there should be a clause inside of the contract that indicates, once upon full and complete payment, all of this is your intellectual property now. You as the author, not you as the editor, because that, again, that's protection. I as an editor, I make no claim over what you do with my advice, but my advice is mine until the transaction is complete. So you want to have that, and then again, either in the contract or inside of a project scope or something associated with it that's legally binding, that it says exactly what it is the editor is going to do and then what they're going to give you in return for the money you're giving them. So if they say they're going to do developmental edit and y'all haven't defined what it is that you're supposed to get in return for it, and they just give you a phone call that you've paid them lots of money, and it's not defined in a contract, you unfortunately are not protected. And I've heard of that happening, which is terrible. So yes, absolutely 100%. you need a contract. New editors, if you don't have a contract yet, look around, start figuring it out. There are lots of different templates. See if you can find editors willing to share theirs with you. That's kind of how I started.
Yep.
And I'm super happy to find. And then the legal fees, if you have to take someone to court, are way higher than the legal fee of having a lawyer look at your contract for an hour and tell you what to fix. So that's my plug for legal fees.
Kimberly, anything to add to that?
Yeah, exactly. The good points about the intellectual property clause. And the only other thing I would add to it is I think some authors, especially new ones, maybe are intimidated by the idea of a contract. So I just call mine an agreement.
That's what I did too, actually. I changed it from contract to an agreement. Because I mean, really, that's what it is. It's an agreement between two adults.
Yeah.
I think that's really funny because it's a working agreement too.
Yeah. See, editors are nice people. We change words for you because we love you and your books. We just want books to love.
When I was telling people that we were doing this, I'm like, just come and listen. You don't have to ask questions. Trust me, I'm nice.
Yeah, it's like authors believe that all editors are just like rabid and we have like fangs and claws and we're like, it's like, we're really not. Like like if you could change the song, just want somebody to love. It's just like, I just want some book to love. That would literally be every editor's theme song. Like, that's all we want.
I agree. Like people, I'm like, give me your books. I love great books. This whole job is just me being able to read great books while they're still babies. Like I'm so excited.
Yeah, we're nerds. That's what it is. We're book nerds. We're on the other side of it. Like we love writing it, we love editing it, and we want love. Just love us by sending us your books. All right, we'll tackle this last question because I think this actually is really timely based on the contract conversation. Is I'm having a book professionally edited. Is it normal to pay the editor in advance or after the services are rendered? I'll jump in this real quick. So what I typically end up doing is I have a deposit that is required and that is non-refundable at the very beginning of the edit job. It depends on what edit that they are doing. Sometimes it will be, I require the payment upfront and in full because I'm not going to work all the way to the end, send it to you, and then not get paid. Contract or no. So I will usually have some form of deposit. And then because I don't, and you don't see piles of money stacked up behind me, I will allow payment plans where I essentially invoice the people. I don't run credit scores. I'm trusting that if you're coming to me and you look at my prices and you say, I can afford that, then you're going to talk to me. If you can't afford it, I don't expect you to talk to me. So I will allow them to work out a payment plan with me. And then if it's like, okay, this is $2,000 for this edit and you can afford this much per month, then it's going to take a longer period of time for me to get through the edit because I'm only going to work when I get paid. I'm not going to finish up the work, send it to you, and then expect money to magically keep continuing for another 3 months. So I work with the authors because, I mean, indie authors, let's face it, I'm an indie author. I can't afford $4,000 or $3,000, let alone $100, depending on the day. So I try and make it as easily accessible to them as possible, where I'm like, okay, we're going to do this. We'll send out an invoice. I work with them on their time frame. I'm like, okay, if you have a time frame of I need this done in 3 weeks, okay, you're going to have bigger payments over the next 3 weeks. And nothing will be sent to you until I've received the final payment. And I haven't had a single issue with a client thus far with that method, because the ones that have come to me are like, yeah, I can do this. So I know that for some editors, they'll charge upfront for the whole thing. And it's a preference for the editor. I mean, if they're editing like Sanderson sized books, then yeah, they have every right to demand payment up front. That's a lot of work. But I'd love to hear what you guys think. Shannon, why don't you take us off?
So it depends. If I don't know you yet as a client, I'm going to request 50% upfront for a developmental edit. If we're doing a coaching session, the coaching sessions are also paid upfront because those aren't too expensive. It's about $45, and then if you want me to read something, then you're going to have to pay the read time too, separate from it. But that, generally speaking, isn't a big deal. With the developmental editing or with the editing packages where, I might be subcontracting a copy editor if I'm doing your dev or line and, we're going through a multi-month process, I'll probably ask for about 50% upfront. That's my standard, especially, again, if this is a new client. And then we do the rest at benchmark payments. And so I've never been bit by a non-paying client. But I think part of that is, as you said, if people, are kind of leery about giving you any money, or they're unable to pay anything, it may be an indication they can't afford the service. And so if they see your prices and they recognize that part of that payment comes up front, they kind of walk past you. And again, I've heard some editors run into circumstances where they've done these giant projects and then the client ghosts them and never pays. And so nobody wants to be in that circumstance. And I know, as an author, you don't want to hand over a large amount of money either without knowing if you're going to get what you're really looking for in response. So again, I try to do 50%, and then the very end, before I send the final product, I'll ask for the remainder. Or if it's a large project, again, we'll do benchmarks. So if I'm finished with my dev edit, then I'll ask for the next percentage. And then once the copy edit is done from the subcontractor, then I will, ask for the last payment and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I follow the same process. I have the 50%, and then I have finished the edit, let them know, and I'm ready to hit send. But I also wait for that final payment to come in, because early in my career, I did get burned one time. Luckily, I learned my lesson on a very small project, so it was not as financially devastating as it was just disheartening to feel like I had worked with someone and then they left me hanging. But like I said, it was a small project, and I learned from that in the rest of my business career to first of all, even use the agreements with the small projects, and then to take the final payment before hitting send.
Yeah. We got one more question that we'll touch on, and then we'll wrap up. So do you want to read the first book in a series if you are coming in on the second book of a series? Kimberly, why don't you start us off with that one?
Yes, and I have done this for previous clients where even if they didn't ask me to read the first, I just personally prefer to have that that background knowledge. It helps with catching the inconsistencies and understanding where the series is going to help developmentally. So yes, I do prefer to read both or all.
How about you, Shannon?
I agree, especially if there's continuity between the books. Then in order for me to tell you if it's working, I need to read and get a feel for the first one. The only circumstance where I didn't do that, I was walking in on a later book in a series for a publisher, and the previous editor had so many style sheets and had such a precise outline that I was able to get on board fairly quickly without having to invest in reading 500,000 words of the preceding material, and just ended up reading about 50,000. But you should expect that your editor, especially if this is a series or a chronological series, that they're going to need to see what happened ahead of time. And so they're probably going to want to read your book, and that's going to be part of the editing process, is to see what happened before and then get a good feel for your voice, your characters, your lore, your magic systems, or your science.
Yeah, I think just responding to Heather's comment. So the way that I've actually been very fortunate. Everybody that I've done work for has actually come to me with the very first book. So I haven't had that same issue where I've had to do like catch up reading. It's almost always been the first draft of the first book in a series that I've been helping somebody work on. I would say that where I excel is being able to help people with the foundations of that first book and set them up for planning a series, because I have write a series-itis, and I have 12 books planned for my own series, and I know how they're all interconnected. I know how to write a beginning, middle, and an end for a trilogy. And so I actually prefer to work with people on their first book, because I can help them set up and see that bigger picture that spans the course of the trilogy, because I'm not in it. I'm coming at it and I'm able to look at that broader picture. I wouldn't be opposed to helping people with other books in a series, but I know that my greatest strength lies in helping them set up that future series. So yeah, just I think really quickly we can touch on. So Heather's made some changes to a standard of 25% deposit, the other half of the first pass, and then the balance upon completion. What do you guys think of that? I think that sounds like a very reasonable thing.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, you're talking, as Shannon pointed out, to be able to catch up on a series, to have the materials like a style sheet or outline. Those are hugely helpful. So I would encourage all authors to share, like when you build those, like, what are they called? The idea boards, and you're developing your characters, and send all that material, because it helps. It really helps to understand what you're going after.
Especially if you're kind of new and you're not looking at the marketing side, which, a lot of us don't. You'll get these questionnaires from editors, you're like, what is your book like? And you're like, I don't know. But having that information, like that Kimberly was talking about, the style guide or the outline or the character sheets, that helps us figure it out. Like if you don't have the nomenclature yet to describe that other sort of businessy side of things, having your your personalized description of this person, the personalized description of where you're planning for them to go, where they came from, that helps us figure out how to translate that into what it's going to look like from that advertising or from that business perspective. And even though that may not be what your editor is doing, just them figuring out specifically where your genre is or where your subgenre is, or what what genre conventions you need to hit, seeing all that, that prep material helps us figure that out with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the one thing that I've run into with authors is that they'll typically be like, but I don't want to spoil it for you. I'm like, I'm the editor. You are allowed to spoil this book for me. I'm going to find out eventually, and I need to know. I need to make it make sense. I was like, so spoil away. And this goes to Aphrodite's question, do you want the editors or the author's outline? Yes, we want as much information as you can give us, because that gives us context, that gives us the ability to see that bigger picture. Because even if we know that bigger picture, the scene by scene levels are still going to surprise us. They're still going to hold twists and turns. I've talked with somebody about their entire book series and the entirety of the first book, and how it goes and the outline and stuff. And I still get surprised by it, wonderfully surprised by it, because it's the scene by scene levels that really hold that magic element for it. The other thing is context, just context. Like that's all we want. And then, yes, well, I'm doing the second book for of an author that I did the edit for their first book. And so like it wouldn't be uncommon for you to have the same developmental editor over the course of a series. They're the most familiar with it. That doesn't mean that you hire them also to do the copy and line edits and then also the proofread. But for the developmental side of things, I think it's actually incredibly beneficial if you can retain that same developmental editor who's helped you with the context of your story. I think there's a lot of value there. And then you have the second pair of eyes with the copy and line editor. What do you guys think of that?
I think it's a value if you can to keep the same person for each aspect, because there is something to be said for the line editor as far as helping you shape your voice. And, you know, it's possible once you've seen the finished product, book one, you start, you know, you're elevating yourself as you write too. But because they've also had an influence on your voice and on your finished product, it's really important to have them. And then copy editors also take different approaches to how they copy edit. So at the very least, having a secure style sheet from your preceding copy editor. But optimally, you'd have the same person that did an excellent job the first time do the second and third. If you ran into circumstances where they're not people that you can work with, again, for one reason or another, obviously it's better to find somebody new. But in the best of all worlds, you keep the same editor for each of those different services.
Yeah. Kimberly, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I thought I was on mute. Yes, I definitely agree. I've had authors beg me to continue after developmental editing to do copy editing or to come back and do the proofreading. And yes, on one hand, there's something to be said about working with someone that you trust, and it's faster to go the second time after you're familiar with the material. But then what you're giving up for that speed and trust is those fresh eyes. So and they are different skill sets. Like, I purposefully structure my day where I'm only doing half of it as developmental editing and half of it as copy editing, because it's a different part of my brain that I use, and you tax yourself, and I need to be able to change it up. So I purposefully do that, and I recognize that they're different skill sets. I don't typically go back to back on the same book, especially without a huge break in between while the author is making revisions. Like that helps kind of reset and come back with fresh eyes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think if you do find somebody who's doing all three, you're at the same time, especially, you're doing yourself and your book a disservice. I know there are people out there and they do it as a budget option, but I think overall the value you're getting by having fresh eyes supersedes that cost restriction. It's almost better to maybe even skill set trade to get what you need if you can find somebody willing, than to have just one person do it, because there are a lot of things that are going to be missed and then the polish just won't be there.
Yep. 100%. All right. So we are a little bit over time, and I want to make sure that we remain respectful to you guys and your time. So why don't you tell everybody real quick as we close where they can find you, whether it's website, social media, or whatnot.
So I have a website called revisiondivision.com. I'm on way too many platforms and Facebook groups, but on Twitter you can find me as Revision Div. I'm on Instagram as Revision Division or Revision Div Kimberly, and again on Facebook in a lot of the same editing and writing groups, because I love the talk of craft.
Okay, I am at itoothediting.com. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram. I don't really do a lot on Twitter, but I am there. You can find me on YouTube. I've got a brand new channel, and actually on Vimeo too. And at all of them, I am at itoothediting.
Nice. And for all of you guys, I have links down in the show notes for everybody who was on it, even though Shelley was cut off because of technical issues with the hotspot. Her website is also down below in the show notes. And if you guys want to have your questions answered on the next stream that we're doing, I'm planning on having a whole new batch of editors. Going to try and see if I can do at least a once a month thing with this. There is also a form down below where you can sign up. The only reason I have a form is so that way I can keep track and, if needed, build a slide for your specific question and tag you as the person who asked it. Otherwise, it's just you can come and do it during the actual live stream. The form allows me to make sure that we actually get to answer your questions. And then obviously you guys know all of my stuff. My stuff's down below in the show notes as well. You can find me down there. Thank you guys for joining us today. Thank you, Kimberly and Shannon. And we'll look forward to talking